I am the stranger in the room in the sense that I'm not in a specific sense of the community, that my experience of Jewishness or of Israel is amputated or very brief. I am someone from the outside, and therefore there's a certain impudence or impertinence in even agreeing to speak with matters of any depth to an audience that is more familiar both in experience and by reference to intellect than I could ever be. I understand that, and there is no presumption, and I mean it. There is no presumption in anything that I have to say. But as an outsider, perhaps, and I stress perhaps, there might be some value of hearing a voice that is external to your own on things that are of, I think, centrality, both to the Jewish experience and to the state of Israel. There's a fine quotation, there's many fine quotations actually, from Samuel Johnson, the great lexicographer, probably the greatest mind of literature in terms of reading of critical literature that Great Britain has ever produced. And he said, and it's not profound, but it's very necessary for what I'm about to say. He said, people need more often to be reminded than informed. I'll repeat it. People need more often to be reminded than informed. And the essence of what was contained in that is that the significant things of life, the most powerful things, and the things that at essence matter most, are, at various stages of our time, apparent to us all, and as we say, obvious. But their very centrality, or what we call the obviousness of them, leads us very quickly to pass them by, or to give them a very fleeting exchange in our daily consciousness. And thus great truths, or central propositions, merely by iteration and presence continually, blunt their impact on us. And the most obvious things becomes the most research or the most distant. And so if I do say things here tonight, I will be saying nothing that you do not already know and know better. But I see my function, if there is a function for a journalist, my Lord, I see my function as being that of a reminder. We're in an exquisitely turbulent time. I think you have to go back to the last century, and the 20th century now is the last century, to 1914 and the years leading up to 1939, to find a moment quite as turbulent. I'm not suggesting that we read old history into new or that we know. But I can say that the turbulence that we are seeing now certainly has no other parallels except the turbulence experienced before the second great conflict and also the time before the first. Again, I would think, if that's Joe Clark, I'm not here. If during those periods there was an index of just how threatening and ominous times can be, if there was a foreshadow of the awful event that fills the consciousness of every person in this room, it was signaled, I think, by William Yeats in a poem that I expected an audience this educated you already know. And that's the poem that begins, things fly apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. And everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. And everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. I've amputated a line or two there. He went on one more famous two sentences, which if you look at the tyrants, and I said plural, though Hitler is the extreme, this was written in 1919, that the best, he said in the same sonnet, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of a passionate intensity. Evil people know what they want. They don't lack certainty, and they pursue it with passionate intensity. And it's interesting, too, that in those two lines, and I'll get away from poetry, the best, those who think cleanly, they lack all conviction, while the worst are full of a passionate intensity. That was a warning. And if I can, there are, in Yeats's words, it's W.B. Yeats, there are foreshadows of every major turbulence that our world saw since then. And at the present, when you look at the state of Europe today, one of the triggers that came into my mind as I prepared for this evening was reading yesterday, and I can't name the country, it's France, it's England, or it's Germany, but we're talking Europe. And it's true, an 86-year-old and an 87-year-old man and woman, wife and husband, who were, I've met one tonight, and I'm very honored to have done so, who are genuine Holocaust survivors. In a civilized European country, 2015, the beginning of September, always an interesting date, they were attacked in their own home. One was left blind from the invasion, the attack, and they were viciously beaten. If you think of this, after all we have heard and said from 1939 to 45, and all the chants of we will never forget and never again, that in this high technological and luxurious age of 2015, that a man and a woman who have tasted all the sorrow and pain that the world can contain, and probably the full 6 years of it, in one of the most demonic infernos that has ever been known to human minds or human experience, that some 60 to 70 years later, they can still be beaten up in their own home. The first reminder of what you already know is that despite the scale of the calamity and despite the impossible, inhuman range of the torments, miseries, tortures, and death that visited your community, the Jewish community, during the Second War, not even the shock recognition of what was done or the scale or the inhumanity of its execution has been sufficient to eradicate the vice that is at its heart, which is anti-Semitism. There is no comfort simply in the passage of time from the greatest horror that we have ever known, because the virus of anti-Semitism is more hardy than most memories. And therefore, as you celebrate in a tranquil and a peaceful and a wonderful country, this country of Canada, remember that the shadows are always gathering, and that in a turbulent time, it is probably likely that they gather more quickly and more intensely than before. The other thing I would like to say to you, because it's genuine, it's a piece of admiration. When I look at the state of Israel, and I'm not, my name is Murphy and I'm from Carbonear, I'm not Jewish. When I look at the state of Israel, and I think about it, I don't know the square mileage and it doesn't matter, but it's not much bigger, if it is bigger, than the Avalon Peninsula of Newfoundland. It really isn't. And I'm not downplaying my own Newfoundlanders, we're a hard bunch, but we're pretty good in our own way too. We've had 500 years to kind of fix that place up. We're not there. We're just not there yet. I'm not asking you to imagine this because some of you have lived it. A situation where a Demogorgon, an agent of the inferno, because I don't know you can go anywhere else when you talk of Hitler and his cronies, when he makes the decision to exterminate the entire Jewish race, and because of the carelessness of the world before he had the ability to do it, advances through grim horror and blood to a manic 6 million, and you say, this is how far it went. And you say to yourself, after that, this is 1945. Bare years after that, the greatest traumatic shock and the greatest grief, the grief must be, it is unspeakable, that a group of people are essentially given a burning sandlot. And from 1949 to, say, 1970, they advanced from scraps and grains of desert-tortured heat and sand to one of the most remarkable countries on the face of the entire earth. I mean, how deep was the tragedy? How vast the extinction? And yet, not only was the spirit not broken, they didn't just simply almost evaporate from the weariness of their own fate. Within 4 years, they're grabbing the world by the throat and building ex nihilo, almost from nothing, fired on at birth, and embroiled in wars not of their choice, as they attempted to build a sanctuary from the horrors that went before. This is remarkable. I mean, it's so remarkable that you don't know how remarkable it is. That a collection of people forced by history and by their own hearts to find a haven and a home in a land that they've known for 2.5 to 3 centuries, and then to build what has been built. Where is the anger of the world, or so much of the world, towards a people that have accomplished with such blinding energy, zeal, and dignity after the horrors they experienced? How can the world be angry at this people? It's an inversion of all that we should know. Even in this country of Canada, which by comparison truly does have a facilitated life, we are at the peak of a civilization. We have material, we have goods, we have universities, we have freedom. We are exempt from cold and heat and all of the torments of history. All of them. This is almost an island. And apart from our engagements in places like Afghanistan, more or less, since the Second World War, which is a long period in one sense, we are exempt from all of the miseries and pain of the rest of the world. Well, pay attention. There is another country that shows it invented itself in one sense just half a century ago and leaped to the forefront of so many of the world's disciplines and causes. It's science. I won't list off to this room the Nobel Prizes that Israel has gotten. It's citizenship. In our country, we are blasé, we are feeble, we are enervated as citizens. There you live and die being a citizen. The virtues that built our country, the industry, the zeal to provide for oneself, the idea of dignity involved in the construction of your own life. Hardships have their flavor if they are pursued in ambitious and worthy causes. We got to the point where our surplus, and I mean that in the most broad sense, we want for nothing. Our surplus inoculates us against the virtues that brought us the surplus. But in Israel, valor is not something you aim for. It is a condition of existence. The ancient virtues that we all know and acknowledge, character, industry, pride in one's being of a country, real courage, the understanding, and no one has it more than an Israeli, the understanding that citizenship is only worth how much you are willing to fight for it. It is not divorced from the exertion of mind or body to have it. And this is the country of all the countries in the world, of all of them, that more than any other, it's less than the Avalon Peninsula. It has wandered out of the deepest trauma that any citizenry could ever hear about. And yet, fingers point west and east, the intellectuals rave on, the Zionist entity. You know, when they say that with that twist of the mouth, the Zionist entity, you know where you are. They have the nerve. This, I think, is so fundamentally wrong. I cannot conceive of an enormity more profound than that of the Holocaust. When you have seen even documentary, I do not wish any closer, when you have seen documentary pictures and know of the dogs, the whips, the torments, and you see the children. We had a child 3 or 4 days ago, the center of the world's news. At best, I'm saying, that was accident. I know the forces behind it. It was one. But it seized the sentiments of the entire globe. They were marching whole queues, long lines of 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. It cannot be contained in the mind. And yet, within the generation of those same events, those few who have survived and those of you who are, in a positive sense, the remnant of the idea of Jewry, have to listen to people, some of them in the Western world, intellectuals of high standards, calling you Nazis. Is there an insult that reaches more profoundly? It is more astonishingly ignorant and vicious that you must wear the name of those who gave such torment and meant to eradicate? It is upside down. And that is so much of the discussion about Israel. The achievements I've just listed. And then you see this frenzy, the frenzy of dismay, anger, and outright hate towards a state that, if left to its own devices and not under siege and under malicious attack from the very moment of its appearance in the desert to this day. There is only one state, and here is the final irony. You bear the insults of that caliber? It's all wrong. Final point that I make, just as a grim survey. You know all this already. Think of it. Of all the peoples in the world, Newfoundland is a hard place to live. We've had our calamities, our shares of misadventures and tragedies. We've lost vast numbers of our troops in wars. We know we are not unacquainted with grief. And every tragedy individually is equal. But there is nothing that, in the whole range of things, Newfoundland itself was never put under the muzzle of some all-encompassing gun. We were never the football of international forces. We were never under the thumb of the most malign dictator in the history of the world. Of all the people in the world that should be bearing any anxiety whatsoever, having gone through what was gone through in the last century, should not Israel at least have a pass for a generation? But there is only one country in this world right now that faces the possibility, and it's true to say it out loud, of extinction. Iran and nuclear arms and the daily chant of death to Israel. Is it not with a savagery that only some sort of God could understand that after all the Jewish world has been in, that the only country of which we can say with reason, I'm stressing that phrase, with reason, it is plausible to think that there are other countries who would like to see it completely extinguished? How inverted has the world become when a country which shows through its achievement after the most profound of tragedies that it did not lose its will or its spirit, and a country that stared down extermination from the entire planet, builds a system democratic, modern, but linked with great piety to its roots, open, welcoming, and if free. I have one simple thing. If Israel were today to lay down all its arms, we would not see it tomorrow. And if its enemies lay down all of their arms, Israel would be helping them the day after. There's the difference in the equation. I want to extend this very much more because, again, it is you rather than I. I am an external voice, but I want to make one other observation, because this is all that it is. The other thing that I find so admirable, apart from Israelis, and I picked them out, as fully knowing what a citizenship means, as fully knowing that it carries at least the equal of responsibility. In Israel, I think the responsibilities far outweigh, in a certain sense, just the services for sure, not the benefits. That's a different thing. And that they have valor at the heart of their continued existence, an ancient virtue now much maligned. That they apply their intelligence, that they have achievements. But there's another thing. All the rest of us, or at least a good portion of this world, are also in your debt. I wouldn't use me as an example for anything except frustration and despair. But even in my tawdry dealings with English literature in university, I came to know and know very well that the structure and understanding of English poetry, which, by the way, is a glory, it truly is, but it begins in the Old Testament. John Milton, outside of Shakespeare, the greatest mind for language and the highest, most sublime of verse, always thought there were no songs, no lyrics sweeter than the Psalms. There were no words higher than the great concluding, thunderous, metaphorical book of Job. There were no images or metaphors of such compressed, formidable intelligence and beauty as you'll find in Solomon, the Song of Solomon, or in the quiet phrases of Ecclesiastes. English literature is entirely a tributary. If you have any feel for the language, you'll know it's born in those great books of the Old Testament. This is a deep and a wonderful thing. And you will find there as well something else, and this is where I'll wind it up. You will find in that book, which is basically the book that started humankind thinking, and the practices of meditation that were applied to that book, which I presume is the rabbinic tradition and others, taught us the idea of critical thought, introduced the idea of contrast, discrimination, reference, allusion, pattern. We built the mind of the West through that particular medium. And so with all of the troubles, all of the horrors experienced by Jewry, with all of the hate turned against Israel, in light of their achievements, in light of the achievements of the Jewish people, in light of the intellectual and spiritual contribution they have made to everybody else, how is it so upside down that instead of rounds of applause and the possibility of an easy living, Israel is still, politically speaking, the dog in the manger? And up until, by the way, events of the last 2 years, the chant was, well, if you settle the Middle East problem, meaning Israel, Palestine, and nothing else will happen in the Middle East. Try that one today. One other thing, the poetry especially, next to prayer, poetry is the closest thing that secular language has to the potency of an address to a divinity. And the great moments of poetry in the English language, as I just said, refer back to the Jewish faith. I'll remind you of two things and then I'll wrap it up. We have in Canada our own affection for our own country and for the people who made it and those who came here and those who are coming here. And we have one poem of homesickness, and most people in high schools at some point were burdened with it. You know, far was it from the lone shieling of the misty islands, mountains divide us and a waste of seas. But the heart is strong, the blood is Highland, and we in dreams behold the Hebrides, the boatman's song from Scotland. From the lone shieling of the misty island, the Scottish islands, the blood is strong, the heart is Highland, and we in dreams behold the Hebrides. That's a song of homesickness. It's not a song of no fealty to this country, but it's an expression of nostalgia through verse. And you know, I think it's one of the finest verses, by the way, that this country has produced. Go back 400 or 600 years before the Common Era, the Babylonian captivity. And the most familiar, second most familiar of all of the Psalms, you all know it, by the rivers of Babylon, We sat down, yea, we wept, when we remembered Zion. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat down, yea, we wept, when we remembered Zion. And then it goes on, and I won't quote what is already known, but it goes on to this exquisitely. Never has the ecstasy of love of Jerusalem been more keenly, in an Irish sense of keening, more keenly expressed in this way. If, says the psalmist, I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget her cunning. And in the old language, that phrase is much more potent, and that means all the great skill, in this case is of a musician. They had their harps. The great intuitional and trained skill of the carpenter, of the musician, the instinctive and educated knowledge that a trained body can achieve. It is the pride of every craftsman, every artist, and every musician. And you have this Israelite in captivity who is a harpist saying, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget her cunning. That is an example of homesickness that almost reaches an ecstasy of nostalgia. And that's 26 to 2,700 years before Israel was allowed at least to form a sanctuary, to gather her sons and daughters, and after the tsunami of horror of the 39 to 45, to find a place where they could be at peace, the land of Israel. How many more ironies can I tower onto that? When people say that there is no connection to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a city, it is an idea, it is a history, it is a poetry, it is the center, the memory and practice of Jewish learning and Jewish religion, kept an idea of home and the deepest meaning of home alive over almost 3 full millennia. I think it would be wrong, I'm just about finished and I know I'm over, it would be wrong to leave you on too serious a note, so with your indulgence, and you can't do it anyway, I got 2 more minutes of a local story that has no reference, but it's the only one I have that can close down a talk. Some of you have been at some dinners that you'll hear again, but that's just too bad. I want to tell you again about Newfoundland, and it's true, incidentally, which doesn't make it any funnier, but somehow when you have a story that's true, you always like to say so. It is a true story. In 1997, we invited Queen Elizabeth to come to Newfoundland to celebrate the 500th anniversary of John Cabot, who left Bristol, England in 1497 to come seek China, in particular Beijing, and instead found himself in Bonavista Bay, Newfoundland, which was a maritime error of some considerable extravagance. And you will agree, it's the kind of thing that we celebrate, which may explain some of the premiers we've elected over the years, but that's another story. By the way, even in I know I'm digressing, even in 1497, it was really difficult to mistake Bonavista with Beijing. I can tell you on personal testimony that it wasn't until 1987 that Bonavista even had a Chinese restaurant. Sure. I'm going to collapse this, make it quick. It was a real visit, a camera cruise. It's the Queen of England. All over the world, sent me down from Toronto. I was there that day. It was a disaster. We had everybody there, and then you had rain and snow and sleet and wind and fog and icebergs and wind and snow, and no one could see her. We had the cameras, fog, rain, sleet, snow. I'm serious, you couldn't find her. Somebody said, look, this is a disaster. And I knew the protocol officer at the Newfoundland government. And he said, we're going to fix this really fast. So they decided to bring her into St. John's, and they said, look, tomorrow we'll have another ceremony. Can't do it in Bonavista because, you know, it was, after all, it was June the 24th. What did they expect? I mean, really. So they said, we'll bring her in and we'll keep her indoors. See? You think we can't think? Not a scholar for nothing. So we bring her in, and they picked, you wouldn't know this, but the Newfoundlanders here, and we infect every place, the Newfoundlanders here know about it. We have a famous biscuit manufacturer, far more famous than Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons is anonymous compared to Purity Biscuits in Newfoundland. I'm Catholic, and as I already told you, I grew up on Purity Biscuits, round milk lunch. I had a friend, Leo White, who was a Protestant, and besides going to hell, he's, well, he will. He grew up on Purity square milk lunch biscuits. See my point? In Newfoundland, Purity biscuits are universal. Everybody knows Purity biscuits. That's why we picked the factory. Because when she went into Purity biscuits, Newfoundlanders would know in their wonderful hearts, she likes us. She knew where to go. She's here. So we bring her into the biscuit factory. This is God's truth. There's a dais here like this, and in front of it there are 3 steel vats with about 3,000 pounds of biscuit dough in each of them, and a great electrical blender with huge blades twisting the dough around. 9,000 pounds of biscuit dough in 3 big blenders. And there's a guy on the stage in a white coat, and he's got the buttons to make the blenders go around. So she's on the stage now, but she's got that purse, so she's on a tilt. She's maneuvering her way across the stage. Now remember where she is. I spent a lot of time telling you this. She's in the Purity Biscuit Factory. She finally gets there, and I can't do the accent. I wish I could. But she looks up at Buddy, God's truth, and she says, "And what are you making, sir?" There is a pause as long as the Reformation. And Buddy finally looks down there and he says, $13.50 an hour, ma'am. On that occasion, my sympathies were with the House of Windsor. Okay, let me truly wrap up. It really is very, very simple. Anyone who wants the world to be upright and perpendicular and not inverted. I think much of the world today is upside down, and its concept of virtue, be it civic, political, or personal, is not what it should be. But if there is a place in which the exercise of what is right and what is wrong is understood, and they are unwilling to eliminate the distinction between those two, it is because of all the forces that combine both to help Israel and to threaten it, that some of the strongest, most valorous, most intense citizens of the world are, and that the animus and hostility that seems to be almost professional against the state of Israel and its citizens has to come more out of envy of what they have accomplished and self-rebuke at the back of the heads of those who insult you. They see so much of what has been done positively that it acts to rebuke their otherwise vacant consciences. And finally, at an event like this, which takes place in this country, it really, really, really is very good to see in a country that people leave the vacancies of the television sets and the games, and that they do combine themselves in actual physical reality to speak and talk to each other on an evening that is spurred by the notion that if there are among us those who have extended more energy and more proper zeal in the pursuit of worthy and spiritual purpose, it is right that as Canadians, not in this case the Jewish, it is right that as Canadians we acknowledge those lives of honor because they give a pattern to us as well. You're a good bunch, and thank you very much.